Hello and welcome to the Schedule channel, and today we're going to be ranking nearly every single B650 motherboard on the market out there to see which ones are going to be the best for your next or first AMD gaming PC. And I'm telling you, there are a ton of B650 motherboards out there, probably so much that you may feel overwhelmed with the sheer amount of options, which is why I'm making this tier list. I have painstakingly, even to the point of delaying my video schedule by 4 days, I'm going to categorize 49 of these B650 motherboards for you in a digestible tier list that anyone can follow, that hopefully should give you a clear idea as to what B650 motherboard you should choose, again, for your next or first AMD based gaming PC. So to that, I like to say, 1, you're welcome. But 2, if you'd like to check out any of these B650 motherboards that I recommend throughout this tier list, I'll have them all linked in the description below, along with my website pcbuilds.gg. So if you'd like to build a gaming PC or find out what's the best build list for a certain budget centered around one of these highly rated motherboards, that can be found on that website pcbuilds.gg for a multitude of budgets and multitude of uses. So that's a really cool tool you can use, again, if you want to build a PC for the first time, but you don't know what's the best build list for a certain budget. So that's why that website exists. So enough of that. We'll get into the tier list, but first I need to provide some context. So let's go ahead and set this straight right now. Honestly, what B650 motherboard you choose for your gaming PC isn't going to make that much of a difference. It really won't. Let me tell you why. So the majority of you who are planning to build a gaming PC centered around one of these B650 motherboards are most likely going to choose a 6 or 8 core Ryzen CPU. So anything like a Ryzen 5 9600X or like a Ryzen 7 7800X 3D. Because to be fair, even in 2024 and beyond, you really don't need more than 8 cores for a gaming PC. There's no boost in frames per second if you go with a 12 or 16 core CPU for the most part over an 8 core CPU. The reason why I mention this is because 6 and 8 core CPUs draw way less power than those very power hungry 12 and 16 core CPUs that, let's be real, are shoved into your face all the time due to marketing and are always pitched to you as the best of the best. But when you look at actual benchmarks for gaming, like I said, those 16 and 12 core CPUs don't achieve that much meaningful performance over an 8 or even 6 core CPU. So why do I say this? That's because in gaming, you are never truly going to really stress your CPU most of the time, because when it comes to playing games on a PC, you're going to be stressing the graphics card most of the time, which is what computes the graphics for your PC games. Your CPU doesn't play nearly as big of a role in gaming as you'd think it would be versus, say, a graphics card. So why do I want to talk about all this real quick before the tier list? That is because pretty much any C tier or above motherboard in this tier list is going to do you really well. Because like I said, I don't expect you guys to go with a really big 16 or 12 core CPU into one of these motherboards for gaming. I expect a 6 or 8 core CPU. But even if you did want to throw in one of those multi-core 12 or 16 core CPUs, B tier and above would also be fine for gaming. But now where it kind of gets a little bit murky and where you want to pay attention to what motherboard you choose is if you want to do gaming and CPU-based workloads that require rendering, utilizing the CPU for anything that's stressful. This could be simulations, this could be computational work, or say deciding to render a video with your CPU instead of the GPU, and that's where you're gonna stress your CPU at nearly 100%. And that's where you're truly gonna see which motherboards will make a difference over the others. Certain motherboards can handle higher core count CPUs that draw in a lot of power better than others, especially for CPU-based workload applications. So that is where your motherboard choice will make a bit of a difference if you want it to be someone who's not only a gamer, but also someone who's going to do any workstation applications that utilize your CPU on a daily basis. So to recap, if you're a PC gamer and you're going with a 6 or 8 core CPU for your gaming PC, C tier and above, you're good. If you're a PC gamer and you want to go with a 12 or 16 core CPU for your gaming PC, B tier and above is fine. Now, if you're a gamer and an enthusiast who wants to do CPU workload applications on your PC with, say, a 12 or 16 core CPU, A tier and above is what you should look at. And to top it all off, if you spend at least $150 on your motherboard, you really aren't gonna get a bad B650 motherboard. Unless it's the Asus B650 Prime Plus. That is a bad motherboard. And I'll tell you why later in the video. So yes, don't worry, we'll get to the tier list. I'll get to it real soon, but we're gonna grade each of these motherboard choices off of 3 main factors. First of them being how good the VRM and heat sinks are on the motherboard. So that basically says, how good can this motherboard take in power from the CPU and dissipate that heat away from the motherboard? Secondly, if the motherboard supports PCIe Gen 5.0, just for future-proof reasons, that would be nice to have. We're soon gonna get a next generation of graphics cards that support PCIe Gen 5.0. Also, if a motherboard supports PCIe Gen 5.0 on the M.2 SSD. I know that's pretty overkill, but again, in the spirit of having a future-proof motherboard that can be prepared for future upgrades, we maybe want a motherboard that has a PCIe Gen 5.0 M.2 connector for a very fast M.2 SSD if you want to have something to write to or act as a boot drive for. And other than that, there's going to be really small differences like how much I/O the motherboard has and so on and so forth. But like I said, you really can't go wrong with any B650 motherboard, but you definitely want to avoid a few, which we'll be covering right now in the tier list. Okay, so we got the tier list right here. We're going to be covering it right now, finally, for the video. But first, I want to give 2 huge shout outs. So you don't necessarily have to get a motherboard from the big 4, that being MSI, Gigabyte, Asus, or Asrock. You can get one from, say, a vendor on AliExpress from a brand like Colorful. And if you want to learn more about those other motherboard brands that could exist outside of the big 4, then I recommend you check out a video from Tech Yes City that goes into detail on 2 motherboards found on AliExpress that, depending on your region in the world, could be a better buy for a budget B650 motherboard than even some of the value options I'll be covering in this tier list. So if you want to check out Brian's video on that, I'll have that linked in the description below. And I also want to give another enormous shout out to the guys who go above and beyond when it comes to specifically this, that being motherboard testing, that being Hardware Unboxed. They have an excellent series of AMD motherboard guide videos going into the benchmarks on different motherboards, covering even more than what I'll be talking about in this tier list video, going in depth on how well those motherboards perform with certain CPUs under 100% load, and even confirming or denying which motherboards pass certain tests of theirs. So if there's a particular motherboard you like from this video and you want to learn more technical information about it, as well as performance figures, feel free to take that motherboard, go check out one of their videos and learn even more about it. So I'll have those videos linked in the description below as well if you also want to check out their work. Okay, so to kick things off, starting from the cheapest and going up in price, we have the Asrock B650M H/M.2 Plus. And where are we gonna put this? Okay, it's a little early in the tier list, but F tier. So this is gonna be a mantra for the rest of this video, but you get what you pay for when it comes to B650 motherboards at $100. So let's look into why it's not the most optimal choice, even if it's that cheap. So this has a 6+1+1 power face design, which is actually not too shabby for $100, but look at it, those VRM heat sinks are pretty small and pitiful if there are any on it at all. And benchmarks show this motherboard definitely heats up, and it definitely constricts the performance of a CPU, especially if you get into the 12 and 16 core count territory, which, to be frank, is completely unrealistic for a $100 B650 motherboard. But I mean, just look at it, like, come on, you need more I/O than that for a gaming PC. For all of your USB peripherals and wireless devices, you're gonna need more than this. So like I said, you get what you pay for, which is why that's going at the bottom of F tier. But now what about the Gigabyte B650M K? Well, let's go ahead and look into the spec sheet of this one, because this one's a little interesting, because on paper, this one has an 8+2+1 power phase design, which sounds great. And even if you look at the motherboard itself, it does have a decent heatsink right here over the majority of the VRMs. But unfortunately, if we look at benchmarks of this motherboard in action with a multi-core count CPU, it does suffer from constricting the performance of the CPU due to there being too much heat and not enough power being delivered to the CPU. So as cool as this motherboard looks on paper with that 8+2+1 power face design, this is also gonna have to join the Asrock B650M here at the bottom of F tier. Now what about the Gigabyte B650M D3HP AX? Wow, a lot of letters. This one is also gonna be a nope. So similar situation to the B650M K, however, once again, if we look at the spec sheet for this motherboard, this is about $130 or so, but let's look at its VRM layout. It's a 5+2+2. So that, I mean, is fine for a 6 or 8 core CPU for gaming, but going off of this tier list and knowing where it'll eventually end up, that's fairly pitiful compared to a lot of the other B650 motherboards we'll be talking about in this tier list. Like I said, it's nothing wrong with it really for a budget gaming PC with a 6-core CPU, but you can get better motherboards than this for even as much as $20 more. So this is also gonna be joining again those trio of motherboards in F tier. We're off to a great start, but what about MSI? Can we do any better with their B650M-P, one of their cheapest B650 motherboards? Well, yep, all right, there you go, F tier. Again. Why F tier? Well, let's look at the specs of this motherboard. Let me show you why. So this motherboard flat out doesn't list out its VRM layout. And actually, let's see, I can't recall what it has. It probably doesn't even have it here on the specifications. No, it doesn't, but to my knowledge, it was either a 6-phase VRM layout or a 5-phase VRM layout. But no matter what, the benchmarks for it weren't good. It definitely overheated with a multi-core CPU. It constricted the performance of, say, like a 12 or 16 core CPU under 100% load. And like I just said before, you can get much better motherboards than this for only a few dollars more. So can Asrock maybe change your minds real quick? Well, here we have the Asrock B650M PG Lightning Wi-Fi, and this one is gonna go into D tier. Let's look at this motherboard real quick. So this one has a 6+2+1 power phase design. That is all right, I think, for a $120 motherboard that does come with Wi-Fi. Its rear I/O is not the most outstanding, but that better 6+2+1 power phase design does allow it to at least withhold a multi-core CPU a little bit better than some of the other budget motherboards we just covered. So this one will get hot, but it won't constrict the performance of a CPU as much according to benchmarks. Still not fantastic, but it's not one of the worst either. So it's gonna be sitting in D tier for now. Oh man, but okay. So the Gigabyte B650M C V2 shouldn't even really be sold because to my knowledge, that's a motherboard that is pulled straight out of like a pre-built system. And from what I've seen on Reddit, people actually have issues updating the BIOS of that motherboard because again, it's meant to be used in a pre-built and I don't know why you wouldn't want to update the BIOS on a pre-built PC. It's a really weird thing. Also, there's different versions of the motherboard. There's like a version like a Y3 and a Y2 and it's really confusing. This is not a good motherboard for $120 so. And if you look at the benchmarks again, this sits at the very bottom. It is the worst of the worst when it comes to budget B650 motherboards. So bad, in fact. I'm gonna go ahead and add a row below this. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up. We are back to the Garbo tier for our tier list, and the Gigabyte B650M C V2 is going at the very bottom. All right, finally, Asus. Can you at all instill some confidence in this price segment for B650 motherboards? Can you present us something that isn't terrible? Spoiler alert, it is terrible. In fact, bottom of F tier. So Asus, there's a reason why I don't go with prime motherboards for any of my budget AMD Ryzen AM5 builds. Or I guess I should say, for that matter, you rarely see any Asus prime motherboards in my budget PC builds, and there's a reason for that. They always slack on the VRMs. And if you look at the VRMs for the Asus Prime B650M, they don't list them on the website, not on Newegg and not even on their own Asus website. But all of these prime motherboards we'll be covering have a 4-phase power design. That is fine for a 6-core CPU, but anything above that and anything that's stressful whatsoever to the CPU, whether it be an 8, 12, or 16 core, I don't think is that good. And for like what, about $130 for that motherboard? Again, just spend an extra $20 or even $5 that we're about to cover, and you'll get a substantially better motherboard with better VRMs. These prime motherboards, their VRMs are so lackluster. They're stripped to the bone. Asus gets way better the more you spend, unfortunately, but their entry-level prime motherboards are not the most outstanding. Again, a 4-phase power phase design, even compared to these motherboards with a 5 and 6, is very, very pitiful. I can't put it in Garbo tier though, because at least you can update the BIOS on this motherboard. On this one, you can't. Okay, Asrock, the ball's back in your court. Can you at all make sense of a budget B650 motherboard? Well, fortunately, I think you can. Here are the Asrock B650M HDV M.2. Let's cover it real quick and show how much of a step up getting this motherboard is versus some of the others that we just covered. So here is the HDV M.2. It retails for about $135. And check this out, an 8+2+1 power phase design. And unlike the B650M K from Gigabyte that we covered earlier, look at this chunky heatsink right here. Asrock did their homework. They've got a chunky heatsink right there, right on top of the VRMs. And better yet, oh, look at that. Its topmost M.2 SSD slot supports PCIe Gen 5.0. That's actually pretty cool for a $135 motherboard. Now, just about the only thing you could take away from this motherboard is that there isn't any onboard Wi-Fi, but there is this M.2 Wi-Fi slot there at the bottom left of the motherboard, which I have utilized in the past to insert an M.2 Wi-Fi card in and get Wi-Fi on this motherboard. It's not the prettiest solution, but it is there. But this motherboard for $135, all things considered, is pretty decent. Especially if you look at its performance. This is one of the few very budget B650 motherboards that can easily handle a multi-core 12 or 16-core CPU under 100% workloads. It's not the coolest, but it'll definitely pass. And for that reason, we are putting this motherboard in C tier. Trust me, C tier is good. Like I said, anything C tier and above in this tier list is going to be excellent for gaming. But look at what we have yet to cover in this tier list. Trust me, there are some good motherboards we have yet to cover. Like the Gigabyte DS3H, which for some reason, this motherboard is like slowly phasing out of existence. When this motherboard dropped, the B650M DS3H, it was about $140, and it was actually a really good motherboard from Gigabyte, because if you check out its VRMs, it's got a 6+2+1, which is not that bad, but check out these VRM heat sinks. It definitely kept things cool. Even look at that chunky heatsink right there for the M.2 SSD. This was not a bad motherboard whatsoever when it first came out, but now it's like $240. If you check out Amazon right now, it's also like about $200. I feel like Gigabyte have stopped making this motherboard, which is a sham. This was one of the best budget B650 motherboards, and it could respectably hold a higher core count CPU for even gaming and multi-core workloads. That's what I meant to say. But okay, so out of respect, I gotta put it where it truthfully belongs. But if you can find one brand new for $140, that's what I get it at. I wouldn't get it at its really inflated $244 price, but it is gonna be C tier for the moment. No, it's a 6-phase. I gotta put it probably above the Asrock. Yeah, that sounds a bit better. Now the Gigabyte B650M Gaming Plus Wi-Fi. Well, I bought this motherboard. I did because I didn't know much about it, and if we look at the box itself, 5+2+2 phase design, the same one as the really cheap B650M D3PH HP AX that is an F tier, and this costs more. Does it look cooler? Yes. Am I gonna use it for a PC build guide? Unfortunately, yes, because I didn't know about this before I bought this motherboard. But this motherboard in reality is not that much better than the B650M D3HP AX. It just has a nice coat of white paint on it. It's gonna go, I believe, right there in between the D3HP and the H/M.2 Plus. It has the same power phase design as this one, and its performance is also pretty lackluster and does throttle when you throw in a multi-core count CPU that's above 12 cores. And like I said, Asus again. This is the Asus Prime B650M-A Okay, so did they think about revising anything? Did they think about improving the VRMs? No, it's still a 4-phase power design for their VRMs. It's still bad. It's still just not that great for even like an 8-core CPU under a stressful workload. It's got the poorest VRMs out of this entire tier list in addition to the B650M-A, but because it's technically the second version, I gotta put it above, but no higher than even these, because at least these have a 5-phase power design. This has a 4. That's abysmal from Asus. And again, they don't list their power phase design on any of their spec sheets for these Prime series motherboards, because if they did, it's just looking like a bad value on paper, because unfortunately it is if you look at benchmarks. Okay, but let's stop with the negative mood. Let's talk about something that's a little more positive. MSI Pro B650M. Never mind, that should be MSI Pro B650-S Wi-Fi. Typo right there. This is an ATX size motherboard. I use this for my $1,000 gaming PC build guide with a Ryzen 5 7500F, which that's more than good enough for this kind of motherboard. It'll definitely handle a 6-core CPU like that. And if we look into this motherboard is the first one in this tier list that's featuring a 12+2 power phase design for 140 bucks. Not bad, and it comes with Wi-Fi. The VRMs are also looking to be mostly adequate for cooling, not the VRMs, the heat sinks are looking mostly adequate to cool off those VRMs as well, which is a good thing to see. And it's our first ATX sized motherboard in this video. It's pretty decent. A 12+2 power phase design is not that bad at all. It even has Wi-Fi 6E, which is good, and I think maybe this does lack PCIe Gen 5.0. It does also lack a PCIe Gen 5.0 M.2 slot, but 140 bucks, I can't really complain. So we're gonna throw this in B tier. It's a decent motherboard. It is the cheapest motherboard out of this entire tier list that has a 12-phase VRM design. Bravo, MSI. So what about their MSI Pro B650M-A Wi-Fi? So I believe I have tinkered with this motherboard before, and this one is also pretty decent. Once again, let's check out the VRMs. What are we given for its price of about 150 bucks? Well, here it says we're given an 8-phase VRM with a 55 amp V-core to the CPU. That's not too bad. For a micro ATX motherboard, I think that's perfectly doable. So this already is probably gonna go somewhere in between, either behind or ahead of the B650M HDV. If I had to give the leg up though, the B650M-A Wi-Fi comes with Wi-Fi, whereas the HDV M.2 doesn't. But I like to think the performance between these two motherboards, if you throw in a CPU for gaming, is not that much, if any at all. So these are two pretty decent B650 motherboard options. And I mean, again, if we were to throw in that M.2 Wi-Fi card for the B650M HDV M.2, that'll make that motherboard above $150 in price, which would make it more expensive than the B650M-A Wi-Fi, which is why I'm putting it ahead, just because it has a Wi-Fi card, but both are excellent options for a budget AM5 gaming PC. As is the Asrock B650M Pro RS Wi-Fi. Let's look at this motherboard. So this is also $150. This also has an 8+2+1 power phase design. Now, I don't think it draws 55 amps. It probably draws 50 amps, which you're not gonna really notice that difference. But once again, being an Asrock motherboard in this sort of tier, what you're gonna notice is that if we look at the spec sheet right here, check it out. That top M.2 slot is a PCIe Gen 5.0 M.2 slot. Pretty neat. I mean, yes, that's overkill, but if you wanted to throw in a future PCIe Gen 5.0 SSD in like 2026 into your PC, this motherboard will be able to support those speeds with a CPU as well that can support that. Also, peep this rear I/O. If we check out that MSI motherboard that we were just looking at, there's no I/O shield. I mean, there is one, you'll just have to put it on, but Asrock have their own right here, and it's in white, so that's pretty cool. Also notice there's no USB Type-C on the back of the MSI motherboard, whereas here, there is a Type-C port. So pretty neat from Asrock. So with Wi-Fi included, I'm putting this right now at the top of C tier. It's probably the best B650M motherboard that has an 8-phase VRM design for $150. That's pretty good. But you know what's also really good? The Asrock B650 Livemixer. Okay, this one looks really out there, but the spec sheet for it is pretty impressive. All right, so here's the Livemixer, and look at that. It's already in the title because Asrock know this is one of the main selling points for this kind of motherboard. It has a 14+2+1 power phase design. That is really outstanding. And I believe this is for a 60 amp rail as well for the CPU. So that is really nice for a $150 motherboard. And it doesn't stop there, because once again, Asrock somehow is doing the best job at this of all manufacturers, but check it out. Their topmost M.2 slot is PCIe Gen 5.0. That's pretty good. So this is a better power phase layout than that previous MSI Pro B650-S motherboard we were just looking at, which costs $10 less, but you're getting a better power phase layout in this one on top of really chunky VRMs. And again, a blazing fast M.2 PCIe Gen 5.0 slot for an SSD. So in all, it's a really good all-around motherboard for $150. This is going to be our first A-tier motherboard of the video. Yep, that's correct. Yeah, A-tier. And it doesn't stop there for Asrock, because if these colors were a little bit too rambunctious for you, you can get the PG lighting, which is a lot more muted, for the same price of $150. Now, the heat sinks are not as cool and out there as the Livemixer, but this has the exact same 14+2+1 power phase design that draws 60 amps with that same blazing fast M.2 PCIe Gen 5.0 SSD slot. The only thing that is missing from this motherboard to make it the best definitive budget B650 motherboard, although arguably it kind of is having this topmost PCI Express slot here for your graphics card, B5.0. Oh yeah, I should mention also the Livemixer and this one don't come with any built-in Wi-Fi, but kind of like the HDV that we covered earlier, there is that handy little M.2 Wi-Fi slot right there for a little card. So yeah, with Wi-Fi, this will be about $170, but the power phase design is very good for this tier of motherboard. So we'll cover other motherboards that are more expensive than this, but their power phase is not going to be as good as this one. You can always add in Wi-Fi, but you can never change the VRMs on a motherboard. So because this motherboard is probably the one that's going to sell more because it doesn't look as crazy, I'll put it just above the B650 Livemixer, but on paper, both of these are equal in my tier list. Asus again. Okay, we're moving up to ATX. Asus, tell me, let's actually look at this. Tell me, Asus, you have a full-size ATX motherboard, you have some beefier heat sinks on your VRMs. Did you at all change that small little 4-phase power design? Did you? Do you at least list it in your tech specs? Or wait, do you just call it as Digi Plus VRM? Ladies and gentlemen, the Asus Prime B650 Plus has the same very small and pathetic 4-phase VRM design for an even more expensive price than these two previous motherboards, $150. That is pitiful compared to the 14+2+1 phase that you can find on these two Asrock motherboards. The difference is night and day. If you were to throw in a multi-core count CPU above 8 cores on any sort of stressful CPU-based workload, it's gonna destroy this motherboard, whereas these Asrock boards are gonna handle it very well. This is not recommended, and it just hurts that this motherboard costs more than these Prime ones, so unfortunately it's gonna have to go at the bottom of F tier. It's just, Asus does not have good budget B650 motherboards a part of their Prime lineup. Those VRMs they include on the board are not the best. But MSI, okay. So if you live in the States, you can't find this motherboard, the MSI B650M Gaming Plus Wi-Fi, but I wanted to throw it in here anyways because the VRMs on this motherboard are the same as the Project Zero motherboard, which I'll cover later in this tier list. But for the sake of ranking this, because I'm pretty sure it'll come up for my international viewers, this right now, if it were to sell in the United States, would probably be about $160, and it has a 10-phase VRM design, which is better than 8. But of course not as good as 14 or 12 here. But if we're sold in the United States for about $160, I'd probably have to put it somewhere in C tier. So if it had a better VRM than these and it only costed $10 more, I think it would rank above those 3 motherboards right here from MSI. That's if it's sold in the United States though. I don't think it does, but I wish it did, because it could be an excellent budget pick for a B650M motherboard. Okay, the MSI Pro B650M. These names are gonna kill me by the end of this tier list. Okay, -P Wi-Fi. Let's look at this motherboard. Now, fortunately, this motherboard does not share the same pitiful power phase design from the really small B650M-P, because this one has a really nice 12-phase power design at 12+2+1. Now with up to 75 amps of draw for the CPU. That's pretty good. And let's check out the price, $180. That's not too shabby. I'll take that. We'll take that. That's a step up from the MSI Pro B650M-S Wifi because it can draw in more amps. So I'll just have to put it ahead because, let's see, for an additional $40 with those, I mean, this really could go back and forth, but on paper, I do have to rank this one higher, although it is $40 more. But let's wait and see how the rest of the tier list plays out for B tier, because the ranking of these two could shift. Gigabyte B650-AX. So this is one of Gigabyte's newer B650 motherboards that just dropped. This one I think is also pretty neat, because if we check it out, it's $160. And it comes with a 12+2+2 power phase design. Not too shabby if you look at it. It's got some really beefy heat sinks on the VRMs. And now from Gigabyte finally, if we check out the spec sheet right here, the topmost M.2 slot is a PCIe Gen 5.0 slot for an M.2 SSD. That is in line with what Asrock is doing. So this one is not too bad either. I think just about the one thing though you could knock it on, which let's see, is it true? Let's see. Oh yeah, so the LAN port on this Eagle AX is 1 gigabit per second. And as reference, if we check out the MSI board we were just looking at and we checked out the speeds for this, as with all B650 motherboards really should be, this one has a 2.5 gigabits per second LAN speed. So that has to be probably the one ick for the Eagle AX, is that it has a pathetically slow LAN port. If you're just using Wi-Fi, that wouldn't really matter, but I mean, we're splitting hairs right now for ranking these B650 motherboards. So for that reason, I gotta put this below both of these. But again, either of these motherboards are gonna be good for a gaming PC. Asrock B650M PG Riptide Wi-Fi. We definitely have to check out the spec sheet for this one. All right, so we're working with a 12+2+1 power phase design. This one does come with onboard Wi-Fi, so it would cost about the same as these two motherboards with an M.2 Wi-Fi card, but this one is smaller. The VRMs are not as good, but the price is pretty nice. Again, this has a M.2 PCIe Gen 5.0 slot here on the top. The heat sinks are fairly beefy. This is also a fairly solid motherboard from Asrock. They are probably doing the best so far in this tier list as far as value to performance. So for about $170, let's see. This is gonna go in B tier because it's got a 12-phase VRM design, like these. But for its price, I think for $20 more, I think I would take the Eagle AX because it has a M.2 PCIe Gen 5.0 slot for M.2 SSD. It does have beefier heatsinks for the VRMs versus this for only $20 more. But this MSI Pro board with that 75 amp draw for the CPU is really nice, and that's probably more than the Eagle AX. So with that in mind, for this for $170, it's more or less gonna be like this. It's just gonna have to come down to price. The Eagle AX is $10 less than the PG Riptide, but both I think are probably gonna be the exact same. But again, this has a 1 gigabyte LAN port. I don't think that's that much of a deal breaker though nowadays. Yeah, okay, I'll keep it at this. I'll keep it at this. Oh, and just when I thought Gigabyte was doing good, we have the B650 Gaming X AX. This is, I'm not proud of this motherboard because I think I used it in a previous PC build guide. So the Eagle AX, as we just covered, has a 12+2+2. And what does the Gaming X AX offer for $10 more at 170 bucks? A very proud 8+2+1. Are you guys going crazy yet? If you are going crazy, then I would like to say, let's go crazy for that like button. Let's smash it. Because the more likes we get for this tier list video, the more it gets out there in the YouTube algorithm, and the more people will not only learn about the right and wrong B650 motherboards you should get, but it'll also help me out and kind of justify me combing through all these B650 motherboards. Anyways, yeah, an 8+2+1 for 170 bucks, that's pretty pathetic. I know the heat sinks are pretty big on this, and it does have a pretty decent amount of AI and connectivity, but it's got an 8-phase. That's not the most terrific. Yeah, the price is just really bad for $170, I think, for that power phase design. You can get motherboards with much better power phases for less. So Gaming X AX is fine for like a 6 or 8 core CPU, but I mean, you can just get a better board for less. I'll just keep it at that. Now, what about the B650 Gaming Plus Wi-Fi? Let's look at the spec page real quick. I need to get a refresher. I did use this motherboard in a previous PC build guide, but I want to say this motherboard is overpriced. It's not necessarily bad, it's overpriced. Let's see, a 12+2+1 power phase design. That's not too shabby. How many amps can it draw in? It probably doesn't say. Let's check the motherboard spec page. Okay, it doesn't say, but if I had to bet, it's not as good as the Pro B650-P Wi-Fi. Right over here, this motherboard right here. If anything, it might just be a more expensive MSI Pro B650M-S Wifi, which this costs 140 bucks. This is about 170. I think it's just a worse value proposition, I think. So for $170, I mean, it should belong here with the B tier boards, but at that price, you can get one of these or some of the other motherboards we'll cover soon in the tier list. So I think for this, I might penalize it and put it down here in C tier, I wanna say. Probably right there. It's not a bad gaming motherboard, it's just these are better value options. Gigabyte B650 UD AC. Goodness gracious, we got a lot more motherboards to, oh man, I'm losing it right now. UD AC, $170. This is like the goofy motherboard of the video. What is going on here? There is very small heat sinks for the VRMs. What is up with this M.2 SSD layout? You only have full-sized PCI Express slots. There's no like small X16 ones or X1s. Like what even is going on with the M.2 SSD layout in here? Okay, well this is a 6+2+2 for $170. What? Okay, it looks like this does have one PCI Gen 5.0 M.2 slot here up top and two more 4.0 slots. That sounds great. I just hope that the PCI Gen 5.0 M.2 SSD that goes here has a really big heatsink because there is none that comes with this motherboard. There is at least Wi-Fi though, and the rear I/O is okay. There's at least Type-C though. But for 170 bucks with a 6+2+2 phase design, that's pretty abysmal for the money. Okay, where are we putting this one? It is, at least the prime motherboards are cheap, but I would have to slot this in between the full-sized ATX board and the smaller micro ATX boards, because at least these you can get for about 120, 130 bucks. The B650 Plus for 150 is a very terrible value power phase wise, but so is this one with a 6+2+2. For 170 bucks, you can get considerably better motherboards, as you can see here from C to A tier. Oh, okay, does Gigabyte get any better from their original B650 Gaming X AX with the B650 Gaming X AX V2? Let's see, let's go ahead and check out the spec sheet. The version 1 is 170 bucks. What about the version 2? It's only $10 more. It looks the exact same, and it comes with the same old 8+2+2 phase design. Let's go ahead and double check that. Never mind, the original uses an 8+2+1, but the V2 uses an 8+2+2. That's a small improvement, and it's at least an improvement at that, but for $180, there are better motherboards with better power phase designs. Case in point, this MSI Pro B650M-P and these two Asrock motherboards have way better power phase designs, and I don't think even something like this does have a topmost PCI 5.0 M.2 slot, which is nice, but again, there's better motherboards than this, but it will rank higher than the original. I'll have to put this above the B650 Gaming X AX. Oh, okay, finally. Asus. Can you make any ground up with their TUF series gaming motherboards? These admittedly do look really cool. I do like the look of them. And when it comes to Black Friday, Cyber Monday, or any Amazon Prime Day, these do go on discounts. So let's look at the TUF Gaming B650-E. It's not a B650E board, it's a B650-E, which is really confusing. So for $180, what power phase design do we get? An 8+2. Yeah, at least we got a PCI Gen 5.0 M.2 slot, but this is still 4.0. Okay, never mind this. Nah, this board's, it's gone. This isn't necessarily a bad motherboard, it's just overpriced. This really should be about $150 because an 8+2, I mean, why would you get this for $180 when you can get this trio right here for the same or less? So this one, to my knowledge, is probably gonna go in C tier because it does have an 8-phase power design like these right here that are smaller and cheaper. But this is a TUF series board, but it is kind of overpriced. These are better values. Would it be too harsh to put it at the bottom of C tier? I feel like it kind of deserves to be there because I think some of the other TUF boards we'll cover have a 12-phase power design, which make them a lot better buys. But let's see, I could be wrong. Okay, the MSI Mag B650M Mortar Wi-Fi. This motherboard is really interesting for its price. In fact, this one gave me a bit of headache as far as where I should rank it. So here's the Mortar Wi-Fi, it's 180 bucks. Again, the reference benchmark is this board right here from MSI, the B650M-P in this price segment. So this one also has a 12+2+1 power phase design, but it draws in 80 amps of power. That's actually a little bit more than this board that we just covered here, the B650M-P Wi-Fi. But let's see which one is cheaper, this one or they're about the same price. The micro ATX board has a slightly better VRM than the full-sized ATX board. Interesting. Now, unfortunately, still the M.2 slots are still 4.0. I wish this were 5.0. But looking at the size of these heat sinks here on the VRMs and the rear I/O connectivity, this is gonna be a cool and quiet motherboard. I think this is a good one. The Mortar series historically have been pretty good from MSI, so for 180 bucks, this is one of the best micro ATX B650 motherboards you can get. Is it better though than the PG Riptide Wi-Fi? I think the VRMs on this are slightly better, and it does cost only about $10 more, but the B650M PG Riptide does have that M.2 PCIe Gen 5.0 slot. Well, I think the PG Riptide can draw in 60 amps of current, but the Mortar Wi-Fi can draw in 80. So I think by that, I would spend the extra 10 bucks for this, and I think I'd put it maybe here at the top. Yeah, it might have the best VRMs for about 180 bucks. Although these two Asrock boards for 150 are the standouts right now because they have that 14+2+1. Those are the standouts right now. All right, okay, Asus. I'm giving you so many chances to redeem yourself in this tier list. Can you make it happen with the Asus Tough Gaming B650M Plus Wi-Fi? Let's look. Okay, so this is about $190. That ain't the best, but this has a 12+2. That's not too bad. For Asus Tough standards, that's definitely a step up from the B650E that only had 8 for only about $10 more. That is quite respectable. And I believe this has, a 5.0 M.2 SSD slot. Still not a PCIe Gen 5.0 slot. We're not quite there yet. But for $190, I think you could say this motherboard is just overpriced. So for that reason, I'm gonna put it at the bottom of B tier. It's the most expensive, 12 phase, in addition to, well, I guess we can cover this one as well. This has the same VRMs as the micro ATX model, and this does cost about the same. So I'm also gonna throw this along with the B650M Plus Wi-Fi because they're the exact same board, just also about $190. Okay, the Asrock B650E PG Riptide. This is the first B650E motherboard we have covered yet in this tier list. So what do we get with a B650E PG Riptide Wi-Fi for about $190? So the same price as the tough motherboards that we just covered. Well, here we get a 14+2+1 power phase design. I think it's the same one as the two Asrock boards that we just covered here, but now we're given onboard Wi-Fi, which is nice, much chunkier heat sinks for our VRMs. Oh, but look at that. Look at that. Is this also our first motherboard that comes with PCIe Gen 5.0 on the topmost PCI Express slot? Yes, it is. On top of, again, a PCIe Gen 5.0 M.2 slot for the SSD. So this has all the criteria. Great VRMs, PCIe Gen 5.0 for both the Express slot, for our graphics card, and the M.2 slot. And also look at the rear connectivity. That's mint. And it even comes with a GPU sag bracket, I think, which is a pretty neat little handy tool if you have a really heavy graphics card. So yeah, for $190, this has everything you need. So it's gonna get a good rating from me. I'm gonna throw this at the top of A tier. It's got everything you need for under $200. Good job, Asrock. Oh, but you can't discount MSI. Here is their MSI Mag B650 Tomahawk Wi-Fi. Who are AMD fanboys know this motherboard. This historically has been one of the best performing motherboards when it comes to VRMs for the price. And let's check out what the Tomahawk has to offer for the B650 platform this time around. So this is about $200, and this is the exact same motherboard that I used in my most recent $1,500 PC build guide utilizing a 7800X3D, which was on discount for $180. But since it's gone up in price, what do we get? Well, if we check down here, we are given a 14+2+1 power phase design, really nice, that can draw up to 80 amps for the CPU. Also very nice. That is more or less kind of like what the Mortar here is, but it's a 14-phase power design for about $20 more. Now, one thing you will notice is that unfortunately, this board, unlike the one we just covered, only supports a PCIe Gen 4.0 slot for the topmost PCI Express slot for a graphics card, which is, I mean, it could be worse, but honestly, those VRMs you get from MSI are really worth it. And right now, you aren't gonna see that much of a difference between PCIe Gen 4.0 and 5.0. So although the 5.0 motherboard will get a better grading from me because it has that, this MSI Tomahawk Wi-Fi board is still gonna be really nice to have for gaming, even if it has a PCIe Gen 4.0 Express slot for your graphics card. And for $200 as well, it's not that bad of a value either. So I will put this alongside these other motherboards for A tier, but it is gonna go to the bottom end because again, no PCIe Gen 5.0 port or express slot, and it is 200 bucks. All right, Asrock B650 Steel Legend Wi-Fi. This motherboard does not exist in America. Everyone bought it for a good reason, and let's look at why. And I mean, seriously, like, currently unavailable. Everyone bought it. Let's see why. Here's the B650 Steel Legend Wi-Fi. I know this motherboard is gonna come up because people are gonna talk about it, but look at this. 14 plus 2 plus 1 power phase with up to 80 amps that you can draw for the CPU. Very nice. PCIe Gen 5.0 express slot for the topmost graphics card. Excellent. Right there, that's a blazing fast PCIe Gen 5.0 M.2 slot. Also great. Comes with onboard Wi-Fi. And I think when this motherboard was around, it was retailing for about $180 to $170, which actually would have made it a bit more valuable than the PG Riptide right here. But I understand it's got limited availability, but just off of the paper and spec sheet alone, I think this is gonna get a good rating for me. I'm gonna put this in S tier. This has everything you need on top of being a white motherboard with, I think, even more rear I/O expandability than the PG Riptide, I think. But here's the motherboard you can actually get, the B650E Steel Legend. And let's definitely take a look at this one, because get this, for $200, the same price as the Tomahawk motherboard that we just covered, this one right here, you can get a 16 plus 2 plus 1 power phase design. And it's got everything else that you want for 200 bucks. This on paper beats the Tomahawk, unfortunately. Or maybe you could say fortunately, because this motherboard deserves the title. This is gonna go alongside the B650 Steel Legend at the top of S tier. If you can get the Steel Legend for about 180 bucks, that's a very good value, but I don't expect that to happen. But you can get the B650E Steel Legend for 200 bucks right now on the dot. It's got everything. You honestly don't need to spend any more than this motherboard, but we've got quite a few more to cover in this tier list. But for $200, what about the B650i Lightning Wi-Fi ITX? Well, this one, smaller motherboard for all of you ITX buddies. I figured I include some into the tier list because why not? So for about $200, it has an 8 plus 2 plus 1 power phase design. This one only has a PCIe Gen 4.0 slot, but it does include a PCIe Gen 5.0 slot for the M.2 SSD. So for $200 for an ITX board, I mean, on paper, it'll rank lowly in this tier list, but it doesn't mean it's a bad board. It's an ITX board. It is gonna cost more. So I will probably throw this. So I'm gonna throw this right here before the two Gaming X boards. I mean, they're pretty much alongside them, but being an ITX board, inherently, it's not gonna perform as well as these boards when it comes to cooling for VRMs, but still doesn't mean it's a bad motherboard per se. I don't expect those of you who are building ITX systems to throw in a chunky 16-core CPU anytime soon. You're probably thinking more of like an 8 or 6 core, which is perfectly fine for this kind of a motherboard in this tier for gaming. But now for $200, we have the Gigabyte B650 Aorus Elite AX. Let's check this one real quick because we do need to look at the spec sheet. All right, so we are given a 14 plus 2 plus 1 power phase design with up to 70 amps that we can draw for the CPU. Not too shabby. Oh, but let's see. Only a topmost PCIe Gen 4.0 slot. So right now, this is going to be competing with the Tomahawk. These could honestly split hairs. They really could. These can go back and forth, really. If anything, I'll have to put the Tomahawk slightly up just because I know this motherboard can discount to as low as $180, like what I use for my PC build guide with it, whereas the B650 Aorus Elite AX does cost a bit more. And it is on a discount right now for the same price as the Tomahawk just at its MSRP. So it all comes down to value. The Tomahawk is just slightly more valuable, but on paper, both of these are pretty much neck and neck. But now for these B650M Aorus Elite AX boards, including the ICE model, these are a little bit weird because these should rank really well in this tier list pricing wise. But unfortunately, if you check out their actual selling prices right now, they're selling for like $250 for the black version and like $200 for the white version. So they're not admittedly the best. I mean, a 12 plus 2 plus 2 is really good. The price is just really high for these for some reason. I don't get it. I don't like that. These really need to come down in price. They should be selling for about $180 alongside the Mortar Wi-Fi here, but they aren't. So because the price is so extravagant on these are gonna go somewhere here in C tier. Don't hate me, but this is gonna go above the tough, but below these boards that are very much worth their price. These B650M Aorus Elite AX boards from Gigabyte really need to come down in price. They need to be right here where the Mortar is. Okay, does MSI improve at all from the Tomahawk Wi-Fi with the Pro B650-A Wi-Fi? Well, this right now is retailing for about $205. We are given the same 14 plus 2 plus 1 power phase design. And I think all in all, this is pretty much the same exact motherboard as the Tomahawk. It just has some white VRM heat sinks. But it is $5 more. It is a little bit more costly. So for that reason, it is gonna rank a little bit lower. So I'm gonna put this below these two motherboards right here. Yeah, that's right. Finally, the MSI B650M Project Zero. So this is an interesting board. So this motherboard retails for about $210, but check out the VRM layout. This one's a little bit goofy. We're given a 10 plus 2 plus 1 power phase design. So ideally the same as this MSI B650M Gaming Plus Wi-Fi, which doesn't exist in America, but this would have the same VRM layout, but this costs about $210 and more or less has all the same features. A PCIe Gen 4.0 slot for the graphics card, and I think a 5.0 slot for the M.2 SSD. No, it's 4.0. Okay, that's a little weird, but you do get a very cool look with this motherboard. I'll give it that. And you can of course achieve the Project Zero look where all of the power connectors for this motherboard are on the back. But for its price, objectively, this is not gonna rank too well in the tier list. I mean, those of you who've made up your mind on this motherboard don't care either way. You're in it for the Project Zero kind of layout with no visible power supply or IO cables. So this is gonna go, I wanna say, probably at the very top of D tier, because it has better VRMs than these two Gaming X boards and the Asrock one. But the price also isn't too spectacular, but it's not overblown. And again, it's a Project Zero board, gotta give it a little bit of leeway for that. Oh, okay, here we go. Gigabyte B650 Aorus Elite AX Ice. Oh man, these are a lot of motherboards. So this one I think retails for about $210. Let's double check that. Yeah, $210, but for a white motherboard, you're getting something with a 12 plus 2 plus 2 power phase design. That is, I mean, that'll definitely work. There's just other motherboards that have better power phases in this price range, but this motherboard is white, and yet still PCIe Gen 4.0 for the primary express slot for a graphics card and 5.0 for the M.2 SSD. So really this is kind of the same as these kind of boards right here. It's just a bit more expensive and it comes in white. But being a 12 power phase motherboard, this unfortunately is probably gonna have to go at the very bottom of B tier. Again, it's not a bad motherboard, it's just overpriced. I mean, it is a white motherboard after all. That white PCB and white heatsink does cost a bit more than just keeping it all black. But yeah, it'll go right here in B tier, but again, not a bad motherboard by any means. Still very capable, as I showed in my $2,000 gaming PC build guide with it. But for $230, for only about $20 more, the Gigabyte B650 Aero G. I actually used this motherboard in my $2,500 PC build guide, and here's why I have a slight liking for it. Okay, so Gigabyte's website is currently crapping itself. It won't list the VRMs, but I did check it beforehand. The Aero G comes with a 16 plus 2 plus 1 power phase design, which is pretty nice for a motherboard of its price. I just wish for about $200 it were a B650E board and it came with a PCIe Gen 5.0 express slot for the graphics card. That's just about my only wish, but the VRMs on this motherboard nonetheless are pretty nice for the money. So if you're to throw in a multi-core 12 or 16 core CPU into this motherboard, it'll do fairly well. But knowing here that the B650E PG Riptide has 5.0 and has, I mean, not as good of VRMs, but still pretty respectable for about $40 less. This is gonna go right around here somewhere. Again, we're splitting hairs, but I think I have to put the Aero G probably right there, because these Asrock boards for 150 bucks are way too valuable. The PG Riptide kind of has it all for 190 bucks. For 230 here, it just needed to be B650E, and if it did, this would be at the top of A tier, but it's not. So then how about the B650E Aorus Elite X AX Ice? Man, that was a lot of X's. Okay, well, this motherboard is B650E, so I will give Gigabyte credit for that because that's exactly what I needed for a motherboard in this price range. It does have a PCI Gen 5.0 slot for the topmost express slot here for your graphics card. It does have pretty chunky heat sinks for the VRM, so far so good, and it's in white for 230 bucks. But get this, 12 plus 2 plus 2 VRM design. We were just looking at a motherboard for the Aero G that had a 16 plus 2 plus 1, and this has only 12 plus 2 plus 2, which technically puts it in this tier here with all of the B tier motherboards, which is a little bit embarrassing. But for $230, this is going to be a better value than the Elite AX Ice, because this is a B650E board for only about $20 more. But yeah, it's gonna go right there. It really needed to have a beefier VRM power phase design to justify its $230 price. It is a great looking motherboard, but that's probably as high as I can put it. Even these tough motherboards would technically be a better value because they have the same VRM phase layout as this one. And now the B650i Aorus Ultra, I think I did, yeah. I did get this motherboard. It's our test bench motherboard. This one's actually pretty good. It's about $240. I believe the power phase design for this is actually pretty nice as well. For an ITX motherboard, this has an 8 plus 2 plus 1. Okay, that's actually okay. Does it have anything else going for it? Okay, we're so deep in the tier list, I forgot why I put this motherboard in C tier. So we're just gonna go with it. I'm gonna put it right there, right there. All right, MSI MPG B650 Edge Wi-Fi. Okay, the Pro B650-A Wi-Fi didn't really improve upon the Tomahawk. Does the Edge do it for about $240? One thing you should note, this is not B650E. It's regular B650, which is kind of an upset. And this has the same 14 plus 2 plus 1 power phase design. It more or less is the same as the Tomahawk. It for some reason just cost more, and still that topmost PCI Express slot is not 5.0, it's 4.0. Yeah, I don't know, I don't see how the Edge improves upon the Pro here or even the Tomahawk. It's $240, it's not B650E, it just seems to be really overpriced. So let's see, I think I might penalize this motherboard. I might put it down in B tier somewhere because it is just straight up overpriced. I think I'm gonna have to put it, it's got a 14 phase power design, so that's still quite respectable, but I think I have to put it right there because its value is just not that great, but it still has the goods to perform well for a B650 motherboard. It just needs to be B650E in this price range. And finally, we're given a crazy B650 motherboard here from Asrock, the B650E Taichi Lite. All we gotta do is simply check out the spreadsheet for this motherboard, and I think you're gonna be blown away at its price. So $240, currently back ordered, because people know this is a good motherboard. Why? 24 plus 2 plus 1 power phase design that can draw up to 105 amps. This is overkill for a B650 motherboard. And at $240, we were just now like, we're gonna penalize the Edge Wi-Fi because it needs to be B650E. We're gonna penalize the B650E Aorus Elite X AX Ice because it doesn't have impressive VRMs for its price. Well, here we've got the B650E Taichi Lite, which totally messes up both of those motherboards, which is having the best VRMs I've seen at its price, along with being a B650E board. This is actually going to get a tier just for itself. That is how much of a monster it is at this price tag. In SS tier, we are throwing the B650E Taichi Lite at the very, very top. I do not see how you need to spend any more money than this motherboard if you want a complete AMD gaming PC with the B650 motherboard. This motherboard truly has it all, on top of everything else that I've mentioned. Just, I guess if you wanted to overclock the heck out of a 16-core CPU, you could do that. I mean, 105 amps, that's a lot of, you know, current to play with. And like I said, people know it's good. It's back ordered right now on Newegg. Oh, we have 4 motherboards left. We're so close. Asus, already I see issues because this is not a B650E board in this expensive price range. It's B650, but nonetheless, we gotta look at it. All right, so for $240, know where we just came from. We just came from a motherboard that has a 24 plus 2 plus 1 power phase design, and we're given an outstanding 12 plus 2 here for $240. I know it looks cool, and this honestly is fine. for almost any AMD gaming CPU for gaming. But just on paper, we just covered an incredible motherboard for the same price, and there's other motherboards that have better VRM power phases than this for less. It doesn't make sense. This has to go, oh man, is this gonna go, this is gonna go all the way down, and is that, okay, because at least the Edge Wi-Fi had a 14-phase power design. At least the B650E Aorus Elite X AX at least came with a PCIe Gen 5.0 slot. This has neither and costs more than both of those. Well, actually, it costs the same as this one. Do we penalize it? Yeah, I think I'm gonna throw it right here. It's just way too expensive for a B650 motherboard. It's not offering anything substantive for its price. I mean, yeah, it'll be fine for almost any gaming application, but there's just better motherboards objectively for less and for the same price. We're almost there. Asus ROG Strix B650E-F. Now, I should say I had a cutoff for this tier list. If you're gonna spend more than $250 for a B650 motherboard, there's no reason to complain about your choice. As long as it's B650E, like we're about to cover, you are good. But here for the B650E-F for about 260 bucks, or $250 with the $10 off promo coupon, you know, a 12 plus 2, but it's at least PCIe Gen 5.0, because you know, B650E. Again, just overpriced. There's nothing wrong with this motherboard. It's just plain overpriced. Yes, it looks really cool. Yes, it's an Asus board, but it's just overpriced. Now, at least it's B650E, which does make up a little bit for it, but still not the most fantastic for its price. So this, I think, it's gonna have to go at the very bottom of B tier. I mean, it's overpriced, and it's a 12-phase design. That is, I mean, it's fine for gaming, but we were just talking about 14 and 16-phase motherboards and even 24 here at the very top. There's levels to this. All right, so the MSI MPG B650i Edge, this was a sympathy pick because I was like, I need an ITX board for MSI, so I'm just gonna roll with this one. This one's all right. Honestly, I don't care to look up the spec sheet right now. I'm just gonna look at where I ranked it. Where did I put it? I think the consensus is that the B650i Aorus Ultra is a better buy versus the Edge Wi-Fi, despite the Edge Wi-Fi costing more. So I think this is gonna go, it might go down here for an ITX motherboard. Yeah. Again, it's an ITX motherboard. You got to give it a little bit of sympathy for that because these ITX boards are a bit more costly to make than just a standard micro ATX or ATX motherboard, but the Ultra is a better ITX motherboard from what I've read, especially for the price. Which leaves us finally with the final motherboard in this tier list, the NZXT N7 B650E. You didn't think I was going to include an NZXT motherboard in this tier list, but here I am. Let's see how this motherboard is, and we can go ahead and look this one up right now on Newegg. So you gotta give NZXT credit for one thing. This is actually kind of a decent motherboard. It is a part of the B650E chipset, which is really nice. And if you look at the spec sheet right here, this has a 16 plus 2 plus 1 power phase design. Pretty nice. PCIe Gen 5.0 on both the PCI Express slot for your graphics card and the M.2 slot. Not bad. And again, it's an NZXT board. So yes, it looks great, but this really overdone VRM heatsink slash plate that's on the motherboard does help out with its thermals. This is not too shabby. Yes, it's $290, but if we check on Newegg, like what we just saw for the black, for $270, this is all right. It's not fantastic, but it's all right, especially compared to some of the other Asus boards we just looked at, because at least this is a B650E chipset with some pretty nice VRMs. 16 plus 2 plus 1 is still really good. So this is gonna go in A tier, and I think I'm gonna put it, okay, so the Aero G, it's got the same phase design. The only difference is that the B650E chipset has PCIe Gen 5.0, but given the price of the NZXT, I think I'm gonna have to go, I'm gonna throw it right there. Yeah, I'll keep it right there. So there you have it. That is the tier list, and I'm pretty set with all these choices. I mean, a few of these could move around here and there. Maybe even like the Aero G and the Tomahawk could swap places depending on which one is on a better discount. But all in all, Asrock, I think, nailed it for the B650 chipset. They are offering the best blend of price, performance, chipset and PCIe Gen 5.0 availability, along with the best VRMs for the price. And that goes to show in these motherboards right here from Asrock, especially the Taichi Lite, offering a 24+2+1 power phase for 240, the B650E Steel Legend at 200, offering a 16+2+1, the PG Riptide, offering a 14+2+1 for 190, and then even if you go cheaper than that, the PG Lightning and the Livemixer for 150, although they don't come with Wi-Fi, offer again a 14+2+1. Asrock nailed it. And I think who would come in second would probably have to be MSI. They offer some really good VRMs overall for the money, except above $200. Above $200, they just fall flat, unfortunately, because they aren't offering any affordable B650E motherboards. But yeah, that's just about it. Above $200, MSI falls flat. But below $200, they're still pretty decent, but not as good of a value as Asrock. And then I'd say third would come in Gigabyte. They've got some good options here and there, like the Eagle AX and the Aorus Elite AX and the Aero G, but there's some pricing issues with some of their other motherboards that unfortunately hurts them. But Asus has probably done the worst. For their budget motherboards, their VRMs are very inadequate, especially their Prime series. Offering only a 4-phase power design for their prices is pretty abysmal. And then the higher end you go on their boards, they're just overpriced. They're not necessarily bad, they're just overpriced, especially their IOG series. Their tough ones are okay. If these tough boards here are ever on a discount, they're pretty good buys. But overall, Asus I think has the worst showing out of the big four here. And there you have it. If you enjoyed this video, I'm glad I made it to the end. Give it a like. And if you like these kind of tier list videos, I do make them every so often. And if you like them, I will probably make some more. In that case, you want to subscribe. So with all that said, thank you so much for watching. And this is the Scatterable channel, signing out.